In 2011 at the Eastern Apicultural Society, Kim Floatham, who's been here a number of times, asked me if I would give a presentation. And he titled my presentation, Producing Unusual Products in the Apiary. And I had to think about that one. And so 2 weeks before the show, I finally gave in and I wrote Kim and I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, comb honey, of course." And I said, "What are you talking about?" Unusual products of the hive. Isn't that a shame? But it's true. At least in the States, people have given up making comb honey. The first few years I made comb honey, I started not so long ago, I couldn't sell it. And most of it wound up going in the melter because nobody wanted to buy comb honey. Then something happened. Perhaps because I was putting nice comb honey in the marketplace, now I can't produce enough of it. And all my honey, I gave up wholesaling honey to stores. All my honey goes to other beekeepers who can't make honey. And I can. And I just as soon that my honey went to beekeepers to be put on the shelf and be eaten, instead of selling 300,000 pounds of extracted honey to a salad dressing company who mixed it with high fructose corn syrup, and the honey content was down by salt. So I prefer to sell it to beekeepers. So this is a little bit about how I produce comb honey in the Northern Champlain Valley where I live. It's a wonderful area that's famous for producing white honey. Excuse me if I'm a little halting or I forget where I am. This is only the second time I've done this program. And I've added some things to it. So I'll do my best. So this is the product. This is the product we're trying to produce. The whole idea of selling comb honey is pretty. You're trying to make a pretty product that's almost too pretty to eat. And I give a fair amount of comb honey away to people that I think will enjoy it. And I have only one request, that they don't put it on the shelf and look at it. But they get out a spoon and they eat it. This is one of the more famous beekeepers in Vermont, supposedly famous for making beautiful comb honey, Charles Mraz. He started his apiary in 1929, and his grandson is still running 1,200 colonies in the Champlain Valley. In one of the bee books, here's his wife cutting comb honey. From the looks of the photograph, it must be the 40s. It's a pretty long time ago. So you would think that the Mraz family are comb honey producers by the way the books talk about it. But not really. As a young beekeeper, I used to enjoy the debate between two beekeepers at our annual meetings. One was Charles Mraz, one was Edward Hazen. Charles Mraz was supposedly the master beekeeper in Vermont. And Charles believed in never handling frames, never taking the colony apart. Ed Hazen believed in total management. He ran 500 colonies for comb honey and sold comb honey everywhere, including to guess who? Charles Mraz. And the debate was constant. every issue, as you know, beekeepers always have the debate. There's always more than one way to do the job. So Charles believed in starter strips of foundation in his comb honey supers. Ed Hazen believed in full sheets in his supers. And on and on. And I used to listen to this debate, and I only wish I was a little more aware and a little more, I wish I had paid a little more attention. But isn't that the way it is? That we forget to pay attention and then it's gone? Well, they're gone now, but I have so many questions. I wish Ed Hazen was still here, because his ideas were incredible. He had it so refined that he had colonies that would draw foundation better than others. He had colonies that would fill supers better than others. He had colonies that would finish the supers and have white cappings better than others. He's moving things around, and the man is running 500 colonies by himself. He's 80 years old. So I wish I could go back. So what does it take to make good comb honey? It takes two things. It takes population and it takes a honey flow. Population we can build. Honey flow we can't. And part of the issue now, why we can't make the comb honey that used to be produced, is the lack of flow. Our honey flow is gone. Our honey flow is so diminished. In the old days, when Ed was at his height, the farmers never started cutting their hay until the 4th of July. Now they start cutting their hay when the dandelions have the seed puffs on top. Previously, they would start cutting their hay and go around the field and take weeks to finish their hay. Now they cut the whole farm in one day. In fact, that farm cuts their field in one day, and that farm cuts their field in one day, and the whole valley is cut in one day. That first nice week after the dandelions go past, every field in the valley is cut. As the family dairy farms, the Champlain Valley is predominantly a dairy industry. And in the United States, the dairy industry is really struggling. Probably here, I'm not sure. But the traditional family farms are failing because it's so difficult to make a living at dairy. And it's so difficult to find help. And the children don't want to be in dairy anymore. And they have to find immigrant labor to come in just to help them on the farm. And the farmer gets old, and the kids move away, and the immigration service arrests the immigrants, and the poor farmer he expects to go to the farm at 5 o'clock in the morning and find the Mexicans already milking the cows, and he goes to the farm, and there's nobody there to help him because the immigration has taken his help away. So the family farm fails, and because they owe so much money to the industrial service company that sprays the Roundup and spreads the fertilizer and sells the farmer the maize seed, they owe so much money to this company that guess who gets the farm? The first thing that they do is they tell the beekeeper, moi, see ya. We don't want bees on our farm anymore. We don't like bees here. We want all our fields to be rectangular. We don't want a little section cut out of a field in the back 40. We want to be able to move our monster machines that are as wide as this room. We don't want to come to the end of a field and have to go around an apiary. We want to be able to go corner to corner and end to end. And the first thing they do is get you to leave. The next thing they do is they take out the hedgerows. The next thing they do is take out the pastures. Cows don't live on pastures, do they? The cows live in the barn. You take the food to the cows and the poop to the field. This seems awfully backwards to me. And you spray Roundup and you kill everything in the field and you have monocrop agriculture. And eventually the white clover seed dies. There's no more white clover seed in the soil. There's no more pastures. Can you imagine? That's where our white clover used to be. And that's where our comb honey used to come from. So now it's really difficult to make comb honey. If we're lucky and we have a good linden flow, we make some pretty nice honey, as witnessed by the piece that's on the bench. But that's our issues now, and that's what we're fighting against. And so we do the best we can, and we take what we're given. But are there special manipulations that are necessary? Can't we just put a super of comb honey on a hive and expect them to draw it out? I suppose we could. We could set up supers with bait combs and foundation in the middle, and we could get a little bit of comb honey. And if I were you, that's what I would do. But I'm trying to produce it commercially. And so we try to produce some 350 supers of honey. And some years, it doesn't work. Some years, we make 8,000 cuts. Some years, we make 400 cuts. All the work is the same. All the investment is the same. 400 cuts doesn't pay the bills. So I went through the books, and I looked up a bunch of methods for making comb honey. And it seems to me that if you're going to make comb honey, you need to crowd the colony down so that they're forced into working in the honey supers. So this is what I think about making comb honey. You only use the best, very best colonies you have. So you crowd the colony down into one story, basically, and this forces the colony to enter the supers quickly, finishing it quickly so that the comb honey will be tender, so that the cappings won't be tracked up and stained with travel stain. But that's a little more difficult when you have 700 colonies in 30-some apiaries. That's difficult to do. So I got my comb honey books together to see how other people recommend making comb honey. This is Roger Morse's book. Roger Morse was the beekeeping professor, entomology professor emeritus at Cornell University. And he reminded me in his book of an old beekeeper I knew in Watertown, New York. He kept his bees in the St. Lawrence Valley, which is the river valley that runs between the Great Lake Ontario, and Montreal, and it flows north into Quebec City and around the Gaspé Peninsula and into the Atlantic Ocean. And that valley is noted for white comb honey. In fact, when I was first starting to go to these big bee meetings, Ray Churchill was there with his white comb honey, and the man won the Comb Honey Award every year for years and years and years. And I saw as a youngster, as a 25-year-old youngster, I see this guy walking away with all these awards and all these silvers, and that so inspired me to try myself that I started entering the competition at the EAS meeting, and I did okay. I won a few. In fact, every time I ever entered my comb honey in a competition, except for once, I won first prize. But you know how it is. You can't win them all, right? And so I guess we'll leave it at that right now until later. So this was Ray Churchill's method of producing award-winning comb honey. 1 to 2 days after the start of the honey flow. Now the honey flow has to start. You can't do this before the honey flow begins. He placed a shallow super on the bottom board, an extracting super. He removed the colony from the stand, and he placed a new bottom and a shallow extracting super on the bottom board. And on top of that, he placed section comb honey supers. And then he shook the bees out of most of the colony on the ground in front of his little comb honey setup, and gave all the extra combs of brood and honey to other colonies in the apiary. So what did he create? He created this very strong colony, almost as if a very strong swarm that had no comb. And what do swarms like to do? Swarms love to draw comb out because they have to. So here you've got a super strong colony with no comb on a honey flow. And they go right to work and they draw out the combs. And that's the basic method used to produce comb honey successfully, is reducing the colony to one box with comb honey supers. And if you look through the books, you'll see that almost every method of producing comb honey relies on this, reducing the size of the colony so they haven't any comb, and then forcing them to draw out the supers, using their own natural instinct to do that. Well, there was little swarming in that because there's no brood. You've removed all the brood. Now, was he the one that put one frame of brood? Yes. I think he put a frame of brood in his super, probably to hold the swarm so they wouldn't take off. There was little swarming because of that. But also, Ray waited until July. The swarming season is pretty well over in July. So he was trying to get what we call our sweet clover / linden, or basswood we call it. In the US, lime trees are called basswood, American basswood, or small leaf linden for the imported planted ones. So that's what he was trying to get in his comb honey. That's what I try to get in my comb honey. Because at that time of the year, the colonies are at their peak. And when we get that flow, when we get that linden flow, you almost can't have enough supers on your colony. Another book written by a famous comb honey producer, Honey in the Comb by Eugene Killian and his son Carl. In 1951, Killian Apiaries broke the world record for comb honey production. With 100 colonies, they averaged 14 supers of comb honey apiece. Imagine. But we can't do that anymore because we don't have the honey flow that the Killians did in Illinois in the 1940s and the 1950s. The flow is gone. It's not as strong as it used to be. So what the Killians did is they cut down the colony. A brood box, he didn't separate brood out. He didn't handle frames. He divided the colony and put the body with the most brood on the bottom board. And he spread the rest of the brood through the yard, or he made a new colony and requeened it. And most of the rest of the bees were shaken on the ground in front of the hive. And he moved that hive to another stand and gave it a queen. And that was the original setup. But now comes the work. Imagine this. 4 days after cutting down the original colony, all queen cells need to be destroyed. So you go through every colony 4 days after setup and cut out all the queen cells, shaking the bees on the ground so you don't miss any. 2 to 3 days later, the queen was taken out of the hive. And again, all queen cells were removed. And 8 days later, again, all the queen cells, emergency cells this time, were destroyed. And the colony was given a mated queen or a ripe queen cell and supered accordingly. At cut down time, he added 2 comb honey supers and then supered accordingly afterwards. Well, in 2009, one of my employees, who was really psyched to make comb honey the Killian method, said, "Mike, why don't we do it this way? Why don't we try?" Okay, so we set up 100 colonies. And my help spent the next weeks doing nothing but cutting out queen cells out of beehives. As an employer, I'm tearing my hair out watching what's going on. But I bit my tongue. I saw what they were doing to my bees. I now had 100 colonies of bees that were in singles in Vermont, where we have winter with snow this deep. And I'm wondering, how in the heck am I going to get these bees through the winter in singles? They'd better make some honey, eh? We had a terrible year. They made 1 super of honey, 1 super of cut comb honey. I don't believe it was worth it. And then when we took the honey supers off, we had 100 colonies in singles. they had new queens, but singles aren't appropriate for wintering in where there is a severe winter. So we didn't do that one again. It's just too much work for what you get. I'd be first in line if I could make 14 supers of honey from a cut-down colony. 1 super or 2 supers, I don't believe it's worth it. Think about it. There were 4 people in the field cutting queen cells out for 2 weeks. It was a huge bill for labor and very little return for my troubles. So then I moved on to another book by Richard Taylor, How to Raise Beautiful Comb Honey. And to me, Richard Taylor is a little more closer to my philosophy on bees and life. So I really enjoy this book. I recommend it if you can find it. You could find it online. There's a bookseller that's a clearinghouse for booksellers. It's called abebooks.com. You can find just about any book on abebooks.com. And there's people in that group from everywhere, including the UK. Hales Books, and all these people advertise there. And all their books are listed. Just search by beekeeping. And you get a never-ending list. You can search by price, lowest price. Well, search by highest price and see what's there. You know, there's $50,000 books there. There's originals. There's originals going back to the 1600s. It's amazing what you can find. But you can also find these books pretty cheap. So he likes to talk about using swarms to raise comb honey. Using what you're given, using the natural instinct of a swarm to draw comb on a honey flow. And that's a pretty good way, I think. At least that's one way we can use. We shouldn't be tied to one particular method. We should employ all the options we can. So he hives the swarm on a shallow super, a foundation, with absolutely no comb present. Places an excluder on the bottom underneath the super, and another excluder on top of the super, and adds comb honey supers to it. Leaves the excluder on the bottom for a few days until they get to drawing comb, so they won't abscond. Because sometimes they'll abscond. You know, if you put a swarm in a box and they're not happy, away they go. But once you get them drawing comb, they'll stay. So after harvesting his comb honey, after the flow was done, there was still a shallow super of brood and the old queen. And he would unite that shallow super, remove the queen, and unite the brood with another colony that was in need. Or sometimes he would place a body of combs underneath that box, and the bees would move down into it. And if there was still time left in the season, they'd build up into a colony that could winter. But he was farther south than I. He was near Ithaca, New York, which is considerably warmer than where I am. That's a swarm from an unknown colony, just a swarm hanging in the tree, taking advantage of their desire to draw comb. This is the one I really like, as far as using swarms to make comb honey. This is when a swarm comes from a colony in your apiary, and you know which colony it came from. You remove the swarmed parent colony from the stand and relocate it on the ground behind the original position, facing the opposite direction. On the original stand, you place a shallow super, a foundation, with an excluder under and an excluder above, and you put 3 or 4 comb honey supers on that colony. What have you just done? You've just installed the swarm on the original stand, and all the field bees, all the field workers, go back to the original stand. So now you've got the swarm and all the field bees that are in the field and in the parent hive. They raise a huge amount of comb because they're so strong. And they have no other comb in the hive. Super accordingly through the flow, After the harvest, you remove the shalllow from the stand, relocate the parent back up on the stand. Now what happens, what queen is in the parent hive? It's a new queen, right? Because that's the one they raised after they swarmed. And what queen is in the comb honey hive? The old swarm queen. So if you put the parent hive back on the stand that has a new queen in it, and you remove the old queen from the comb honey super that was below, from the brood comb that was below the queen excluder, you get rid of the old queen, unite it with the original parent hive that's now got a new queen in it, and you still have your colony, but it's got a brand new queen in it for another year. So that's a pretty ingenious method of raising queens and maintaining the number of colonies in the apiary and requeening your beehive. But it's pretty tough to rely on swarms to be your main method of making comb honey. It's just when you're given a swarm, when you're given the opportunity, that's a good thing to use. So use what you have. Then there's the shook swarm method. Basically the same thing. You select a strong colony with early swarm preparations. This is a colony that has young queen cells in it, has started swarm preparations. Again, you move the parent colony off the stand and handle it pretty much the same way. When you start a colony like this, either the known swarm method or this method, you get such a strong colony right off the bat that you can't add just a couple supers. You have to add significantly more because they just don't have the room. So as you see, you shake most of the bees from the parent colony onto a landing board out in front of the new colony, in front of the old stand. Add the supers, excluder underneath. This is the landing board. This is what it looks like when you shake all the bees on the ground in front of the hive. You put a piece of plywood or something or a crown board up against the entrance and the bees will crawl right up it into the hive. After harvest, you remove the shalllow from the stand, relocate the parent, and it's the same way as before. It's just like having a swarm from a known colony. You just created the swarm. It's called a shook swarm. The parent had cells in it already. They go on to raise a new queen. The one on the part on the where you put the old queen, the comb honey producer, again you get rid of the old queen, you unite it with the parent. You've got your colony back with a new queen. This made me think when I read this. I make these super strong cell building colonies by adding emerging brood to a strong colony. Why couldn't I just build my colonies up to super strong colonies by adding brood from my brood factory nucleus colonies? Seems like a good idea to me. I've never done it, but wouldn't that be a good way to make super strong colonies with huge populations that when the honey flow comes on, they just want to draw comb out? I may even try this a couple times this next summer to see what happens. I think this might be a really good idea because this is what you get with a strong cell building colony. This is a cell builder. Look at the bees on the right-hand picture. Imagine crowding that down into a shallow super and putting comb honey supers on it. They'd have to draw the foundation, and if you are on a flow, they're going to have to finish it quickly. It's going to be finished, drawn, filled, capped quickly, which is what you're trying to do with comb honey. That way it's white, the cappings are white, not travel stained, and the comb is tender, not tough. It's important to get it to be drawn fast so that the comb is not tough. So what method do I use? I'm a lazy beekeeper. Not really, but I don't have the time to fiddle with it. So after my first two extracting supers go on, we go back around when those supers are being filled well, being drawn out well. They're forming burr comb between the supers. They're obviously crowded for room. Because they're filling the supers faster than other colonies in the apiary, these are obviously the ones that are producing the most honey. These are the ones that I want to use to make my comb honey. So I remove the two supers that are already almost full, and I place a comb honey super on the top of the brood nest and put the almost filled supers of extracting back on top. Now you've got a super of foundation that violates bee space between the brood chamber and 2 full honey supers on a honey flow. Now, if you were an extracted honey producer and you needed another super of drawn comb, isn't that what you would do? Isn't that how you would handle supers for extracting with foundation, with wired foundation? Isn't that where you would put it if you were drawing a super of extracting honey? That's what made me think, well, why don't I just use the same method for making comb honey? So basically, that's what I do. I just put the supers on and let them draw it and let them fill it, and I take what I'm given. So all my comb honey supers are painted pink. So I can go into an apiary, and if there's comb honey supers in that apiary, I know exactly where they are. And I do pretty well. Most year I make several thousand cuts. This year I made over 4,000 cuts, and it wasn't a great season. You could do the same thing. You could put bait combs, empty extracting combs, in that super at the edges, 2 or 4 on each edge, and put comb honey frames with foundation between them. And it's going to draw the bees right up into those frames, and they'll draw it out and fill you up some nice frames of cut comb. You're not doing it commercially. You're just trying to make some nice cut comb to put on the bench. So that's pretty much the way comb honey is produced and the way I produce my comb honey and some of the ways I'm thinking about perhaps investigating. So this is more about setting up the foundation and harvesting and processing the comb honey for market. In the US, we have several different styles of frame. The Hoffman frame has a thick top bar with a wedge. You install the foundation, you nail the wedge in. Is that what you use here? A little wooden wedge with nails. It's a thick top bar. Our standard comb honey box is that 4-inch square. In order to fill that comb honey box properly, we need a piece of comb that's at least 4 inches square. Well, with the Hoffman top bar, thick, deep top bar, there isn't enough comb in that frame. If you even to cut it wood to wood, it would be short of filling that box. Looks terrible. It's as if the customer was being cheated. And so that frame doesn't work properly. So we go to the next size up, the medium depth frame. These are 6 5/8 supers. And now there's plenty of room in that comb to cut out that 4-inch square. But there's too much waste. So you have a lot of waste, and a nice comb, you don't want to waste the honey. So they make another style. It's called the thin top bar. These are thin top bar, shallow frames. They're 5 11/16 or 5 3/4 depth supers with the frames. And now because the top bar is thin, there's plenty of room in that cut of comb that you can trim all 4 sides. And that's important to trim all 4 sides because that's what makes it pretty. Because you can see, that's why I like the US standard container better than the British standard container. Because not only does it have a clear top, it's got a clear top and a clear bottom and clear sides. And you can see the entire piece of comb. You can see the comb structure. It's beautiful. Nothing's hidden. If there's any dirt in that or any liquid honey in that comb, you'd see it. And so you produce a beautiful package that's on side by side with sections and round sections will outsell sections every time because it is so pretty. And that is why people nowadays are buying comb honey, because it's pretty. In the shallow top bar frames, there are 2 styles. one with a split top bar and one with a grooved top bar, as you can see here. The one on the bottom is split, and the foundation goes through the split. The other one is got a grooved top bar, and the foundation is installed in the groove. A little close-up of the end bars and how it looks with the split. So, being more of a student of Edward Hazen than I am of Charles Mraz, and believing in full sheet of foundation, if you don't put a full sheet of foundation in, and the flow isn't a strong flow, and the bees don't draw the comb and fill it immediately, it's too slow, the bees will draw drone comb in that space where there's no foundation, and they'll fill that comb with drones. And then once they put one drone in a piece of comb honey, it leaves a cocoon. It leaves an ugly black mark. And you can't sell that, because the whole idea of making comb honey is pretty. And it looks ugly when it has cocoons in it. So I have to trim, I put in full sheets. But when you put a full sheet in, you cannot go with a full sheet from the top bar to the bottom bar. Because the first thing the bees do is they attach the foundation to the bottom bar. Then when they draw the foundation out, it stretches. And instead of having a nice flat piece of comb honey, you wind up with a curve at the bottom. And I guess it's okay if the curve still allows you to fill the box. If it makes it too thick or irregular, it doesn't fit in the box properly. And if you have a curve in your comb honey, points will be taken off when you put it on the bench. So you try to have it always straight as you can. So this is a little jig I have for cutting my foundation. You put the foundation on the jig. You put the block that's on the top of the jig over the foundation, and you use it as a pattern cutter, and you slice it with a razor blade knife. Something like this. And you cut the little piece off. You need about a 3/8 inch gap between the bottom of the foundation and the bottom bar. So when they draw it, it hangs. They draw it, the pressure of the bees hanging on it, it keeps it straight. The grooved top bar frame, the foundation, again, you cut the foundation and you install it in the groove, but you have to do something to hold it in the groove. There is no wedge. You don't use nails. What you use is hot wax, hot beeswax. See the little tool at the bottom? It's called the hot wax tube. I don't know if you have that here. Do you have that tool here? No? So basically what it is, it's like if you put a straw, a soda straw, in a glass of soda or milk, and you put your finger on the end of the straw, you could pick it up out of the liquid, and the liquid would stay in the straw until you took your finger off. Well, the same is with this. It's a tube, and on the handle, there's a hole. You put the tube, the hot tube tool, in the beeswax. It fills the tube up. You put your finger on the hole. You take it out of the beeswax, and you open it. You let it run across the groove, and it glues the foundation into the groove with hot wax. First, you have to clean the old wax out of the comb. So there's a special little tool made that we can buy at the bee supply company. It's a little square scraper, and they've got a nice little angle on it and a handle so you can scrape it right off. Fingers won't get in the way, and you won't scrape the skin off your knuckles. And I made a jig that holds 4 frames at a time. So I can install four frames of foundation at a time, and by the time I get back to the first one, it's cooled off, and I can remove the comb from the jig. Now when you remove the comb from the jig, if you just take it off the jig and hold it sideways, the foundation flops. It's still warm, it breaks off the frame, and you lose it. So you have to be careful to put your fingers under the foundation and hold the foundation up into the frame when you turn it over. And once you get it vertical, it hangs in the groove, 3/8 of an inch above the bottom bar, and they draw it out. So here's one of the frames. You can't see the groove, but the insert that the frame sits on is at the same depth as where the foundation would be. So when you put the foundation in the groove, you slide it and set it into the groove, it sits right on the insert. Something like this. Now you can see the groove. You see where the groove is, and you see where the insert comes. You put the piece of foundation in the groove. You can see how it's 3/8 from the bottom bar. And you use hot wax, and you run a bead of hot wax along the groove, and it cools quickly, and now the foundation is glued into the groove. This is the split top bar. This is a little different. You don't have to trim the foundation on a split top bar. But getting the foundation through that little split can be a chore. So how do you do it? Well, when I first started out, I sort of pulled it apart, and I held the bottom of the frame with my knee, and I'm inserting this, and crazy with 300 supers. No, impossible. One super, yes. 300 supers, no. So you make a jig. This is a hard board. This is a piece of oak board with 2 sheetrock screws. What do you call sheetrock screws? Hardboard screws, gypsum screws, whatever you use. They're hardened screws. Excuse me? Plasterboard screws. Yes. So you put them up through this piece of oak so that the outsides of the screws are 3/8 apart. Then you file the threads off the screws so they're smooth. This is more or less what it looks like. The 2 boards, the 2 little cleats on each end of the board are spacers. So when I put the split top bar on the screws like this and then turn it 90 degrees, you put it on there like that, and when you turn it 90 degrees, it opens up the groove, the split. Then you push the frame down until it contacts the cleats, and now the top bar is automatically 3/8 of an inch above the jig. So when you put the foundation down between the screws and into the slot and bottom it out on the jig, it automatically winds up 3/8 of an inch from the bottom bar. So you put it on your jig, you get it set, you get the groove all set, the split all set, like this. You see how it's filed off? You see how the threads are filed off? It won't work if you don't file the threads, because the threads hold onto the wood and you can't pull the frame off the screws. So you put the foundation between the screws, through the slot, bottomed out on the jig. You hold on to the foundation and stretch it, and you hold on to the frames, the sidebars of the frames at the same time, and you quickly pull it off the screws, and the slotted top bar, grooved top bar, snaps together, and it holds the foundation. Something like this. You have to stretch. This is a little difficult to use until you get the hang of it, because if there's any stress in that at all, it pinches the foundation wrong, and you get a wavy foundation like this. And if you have a wavy foundation, you have a wavy comb of honey. So you pull it off the screws like that, and here's what you get. You get a nice sheet of foundation sticking up above the top bar and 3/8 of an inch from the bottom bar. You fold over the edge of the excess foundation, and now it holds it there and won't fall through. When you go to harvest your comb honey, that strip of extra beeswax is gone. The bees have chewed it right off of there, and I assume they've used that wax somewhere else in their work. And so you get a nice straight piece of foundation installed in the frame the way it should be. So that's how you install the foundation. So now we have to talk about cutting the comb and packaging it, getting it ready for market. So this is my comb honey setup. I have a table with a cutting board. I like to use a board because it's a nice solid flat surface underneath. If I were to cut the comb honey on the draining board underneath it, it would make a raggedy edge because the knife wouldn't be contacting the surface all the time. And so it would tear the foundation. As the knife went over each little hole, it would tear part of the foundation. And that doesn't look as nice. My cutter, if you ever saw, there's a Walter T. Kelly company in the States. It's an old bee supply company. Started, my gosh, it must have been in the 20s by Walter Kelly, the bee man. He had a picture of a queen bee with his head on it. And through the years, when he first started, it must have been in the 20s. When he first started, the head was a young man. And before he got done, the head was an old man. But his company made a copper device that had 4 cavities in it. And the cavities were the same size as the 4-inch square comb honey box. And you put a clothes iron, you saw a clothes iron on the copper cutter, and it heats up the copper, and it works as a punch. And you set it on the comb honey frame, and it melts its way down through, and you pull it off, and you have 4 nice pieces of comb honey that you don't have to fiddle with. That's all well and good if the comb honey would only come out of the cutter. But the comb honey won't come out of the cutter. So you wait, and you pick it up, and you wait, and you wait, and you get tired of waiting, and as soon as you say, well, I'm not going to wait any longer, you go like this, it comes out, it lands on the table, it crunches, and you can't do it that way. I got very frustrated. This is what the cutter looks like. There's also another popular cutter on the market now. This copper product is gone. This copper tool is gone. They don't make this anymore. I actually got a tin knocker to make me one. I gave him a pattern, and he made me one. There's also one sold on the market. It's probably sold here, isn't it? The little square one at the bottom as a punch. Same thing. You put it in hot water, you use it as a punch, and you punch out the piece, and it winds up crushing the comb, and it's not a very good way to do it. Rather, I use it as a marker. I use the hot copper tool as a marker. Rather than using it as a punch, I just set it on the capping and get it situated right above it where I want it, and then just touch that hot copper to the comb honey capping, and it makes a square mark and gives me a pattern on where I can cut it. I actually use 2 hands to get it right, and I want that top edge to be just below the top bar. And I lower it down carefully, make the marks like this, and then I cut it with hot knives. Now this piece here is only going to have 2 quality pieces. The 2 outsides aren't done yet. And so putting a piece of comb honey in a package from the 2 end pieces is not pretty. It's not finished yet. It's not capped. And part of the deal is making it pretty. So it's got to be finished. So I'll get 2 cuts out of this comb. If the comb wasn't finished all the way to the bottom, all the way across, I get no cuts out of the comb. This is what happened to us this year. It wasn't a very good flow. And so a lot of the supers never got finished. They had a nice strip of about a half a strip across the top and finishing it down on the sides. But I couldn't get 4 pieces out of it, and many I couldn't even get 1 piece out of. I could get half pieces out of. So we tried cutting half pieces and fitting them together in the plastic boxes. and I sold them at a discount. And some people like it that way. In fact, I think what they do is they take the little pieces, the half pieces, out of the plastic box and put it in a jar and fill it up with liquid, and they call it chunk honey. So this is what it looks like. I cut it on my board. I have a hot plate. I have that hot plate, and I put those two knives in the hot plate. And I make one cut with each knife. The first hot knife cuts along the top bar, along the mark, gets wiped and put back in the hot water. The next knife cuts the bottom along the mark, put back in the hot water. And again, then the first knife is removed again, and the two sides are cut. Back in the hot water. The next knife cuts the two middle pieces, back in the hot water. One of the things, if you're going to prepare honey for show, comb honey for show, one of the big problems is that the knife tears the capping as you cut it. So a trick to make nice comb honey for show, you want a nice, straight, non-raggedy edge on your entry. You take a hot knife and you reinforce your marks, and you melt the capping. So the first hot knife would cut down through the capping. You wiggle the capping just a little bit so the knife won't grab the capping as you remove it, and you remove the knife from the capping. Then the next hot knife continues a little farther and cuts down as far as the foundation. And you get another hot knife. You can't do this with a cold knife if you're going to prepare for show. Then the third hot knife cuts through the foundation, and the fourth hot knife cuts all the way to the board. So now you've got a nice straight cut that's even, it's not raggedy, it's not torn, and that's how you make show quality comb honey. So here's the comb honey. One of the big deals on making comb honey is you want it drained well. You can't put comb honey in a final package and have it leak into the package, because the first thing that happens to that liquid is it crystallizes. So you have a puddle of crystallized honey in the bottom of your comb honey packaging, and that looks ugly. It's not pretty anymore. And the whole idea is to make it pretty. So you have to drain it. You have to get rid of that honey. Let it drain off. What I use are baker racks. You have bakery racks here, I'm sure. And you have screens. These screens are made for making glazed donuts. So they dip the donuts in the glaze, put it on the rack, it drains down into the pan, and when it's dried, you take the donuts off and package them. Well, it's the same thing with the comb honey. You take it off your cutting board, you put it on the draining rack, and you let it drain for 24 hours in a warm place, and all the liquid will drain out. And so this is the finished product. If you were to put your comb honey in a show, you drain it for at least 24 hours to get almost all the liquid out of it. Then you install it in a temporary container and take it to the show. And before you go to the show, you dump the comb honey on your hand upside down so you don't touch it. You know, when you pick that comb honey up off the cutting board, you don't pick it up like this, because it puts a dent in the side of the comb honey. You pick it up like this by the foundation. You pick it up by the foundation and handle it by the foundation. So when you're preparing the final container for the show, you put your hand on top of the open container, you turn it upside down, you pull the original container off, and I guarantee it will have honey in it. Because there's always a little bit more. And so you have to get the comb honey off the bottom capping. And I hate to tell you this, how I do that. They don't know that. Well, they do now. But it makes a really pretty product for you. Wouldn't do that and put it on the shelf for sale, obviously. But this is different. Honey for show is different. So you go through all kinds of contortions to make a pretty product that the judges will accept. Sometimes. And so this is the product that you wind up with a nice straight foundation, filling the package well, something like this. Isn't that a nice pile of comb honey? On the shelf, wouldn't you like to put that on the shelf in the store? People would flock to that. You'd sell this out immediately. They've never seen comb honey like this. I see people selling comb honey from brood nests. I see a guy that buys my comb honey, but before I have any, he's cutting brood comb and telling people that it's better because it's got protein in it. I guess so. It's got protein in it. It's gross. So that's my finished product with my label. This is an 1.5 inch or so inch label. It's a strip that goes all the way around the packaging, meets on the other side. It not only labels the product, but it tapes the cover on at the same time. Many people will use a piece of Scotch tape to hold the comb honey cover on. That makes it look ugly. It also takes time. Imagine having 8,000 cuts or 4,000 cuts and you have to put 2 pieces of tape on each cover and then put a label on it. Most of my honey is sold without my label on it. Almost entirely, my comb honey is sold to beekeepers who put their own label on it. With a photograph of my new buff Orpington rooster. Thank you for listening.
You're in an area in Vermont where maple syrup is predominant.
Yeah.
Do you find you're competing with the maple syrup products as with honey, or do maple syrup people have their syrup and then also have the honey?
They have such a reputation worldwide for this unique and fancy product that everybody wants to get a taste of, that there's really no competition. They're getting, until recently, our honey prices were very low. They're finally starting to go up. Bulk honey, liquid bulk honey now is $2.25 a pound in a barrel, in a 600-pound barrel. Maple syrup is up around $3. And it was around $4 until so many producers started coming online and the price has gone down a little bit. But there's no competition. Although the syrup makers don't really like my bees because they get a sniff of that sweet sap. It's that sweet steam coming out of the sugar house. And if the day is warm enough, there's an issue. In fact, the tap holes, if they leak a little bit, the water evaporates, leaving a sweet residue behind, and there's bees all over the tap holes.
Can you enlighten us a little bit more about handling the cut comb before you dry them? Because as you pinch it by the foundation, you leave your fingerprints on the side of the cut comb. Do you use spatula or how do you?
No, but I'm pretty good at handling the comb by the foundation. The foundation is tough enough so I could pick the comb up by the foundation and not leave a fingerprint. Practice.
If you're using foundation, do you use a thin foundation or normal?
A very thin foundation.
It's
but
just
there's two foundations. Yeah. There's the very thin foundation that's used for sections. That's too thin for comb honey. And you can't pick it up by the foundation. And so if you're using that foundation, that may be why. You may be using that ultra-thin foundation that's used for sections. But the section foundation is supported by the section. So the surplus, it's called surplus comb foundation, and that's a little bit thicker. It's still thin enough not to be chewy, but it's a little thicker than section comb foundation, and you can pick it up by the foundation. So if that's what you're using, I would agree with you.
Sort of two questions. Do you ever make your own foundation?
I do not.
How can you be comfortable that you're getting the best foundation, the quality foundation for that product?
I've bought several companies' foundation, and the one I use is a very good foundation. As far as what? As far as contaminants?
Yeah.
I don't know how to get away from that.
No.
People were telling me that you shouldn't sell comb honey because there's contaminants in the foundation. And fine, so I called up the Dayton company and I told them what I was up against. And is there any way I can have something that I could use to tell the people what's in the foundation? And they said, all they would tell me was that the contaminants in the foundation are below acceptable levels. What does that mean? So, if I didn't, there would be no foundation. I mean, there would be no comb honey. I could make foundationless. I could let them raise their own or put a little starter strip. But in my situation, it doesn't really work well for me.
And second question, how much do your comb honey blocks like that sell for in retail price?
In retail price, I would say somewhere around $10. I'm getting for the full pieces, I'm getting $6 a cut. So then I sell it. Each store is different, or each beekeeper is different. If the beekeeper is buying it from me from $6 and selling it to a store, and I would say the price is going over $10 then.
With regards to your foundation size, do you ever use a drone size foundation?
I never have, no. I don't know if I could get thin foundation in the drone size. It might be a little thicker because it's for brood. No, I never have. I have enough problems with drones in my comb honey.
I noticed that at the sides of the piece of foundation there was a gap between the foundation and the sidebars.
That's right.
So it hangs freely. It's not slotted into the
It's not
slots.
slotted in, no. It's not attached anywhere but the top bar.
Right.
Because you want it to hang.
Yeah.
And actually, it's wide enough so that you can trim off that raggedy piece at the edge and make a nice, pretty cut so you can see the comb structure. So you get four nice cuts that are actually trimmed on all four sides.
Yeah. Lovely.